The December chill cut through my skin like blades as I stood there in the dark garage, listening to the laughter coming from the house that was once mine. Christmas lights twinkled outside the foggy window, and I could see the silhouettes of my family gathered around the lavish table, my home, my family. But now I was just a nuisance. I clutched the yellowed envelope tightly in my trembling hands. 30 years keeping this secret. 30 years protecting my son from the most devastating truth a father could bear, and this would be the night everything would change. Michael, my only son, had banished me to the garage like an old dog. He, the billionaire business magnate, couldn't have an embarrassing father around his important guests. How ironic if he knew that every penny of his fortune had been built on a lie. The envelope weighed like lead in my hands. Inside was proof that my son wasn't who he thought he was. And worse, proof that I wasn't the man he thought he knew. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. My name is Samuel Brooks, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes, to save a family, you have to first destroy it. The call came on a rainy Tuesday as I was organizing my morning medications. "Dad, I need to talk to you." Michael's voice sounded different, distant. "You're spending Christmas here at home, but there are some conditions." Conditions. That word echoed in my mind like a gunshot. In 69 years of life, I never imagined my own son would use that word on me. "What kind of conditions, Michael?" "Look, Dad." He sighed on the other end of the line, and I could hear the rumble of Manhattan traffic in the background. He was probably at his bank, closing another multi-million-dollar deal. "I'm meeting with some important investors, people who can take my business to the next level. I need you to behave, as if I were a naughty child. Michael, I raised you alone after your mother." My voice trailed off. Even after 25 years, it still hurt to talk about Margaret. "I worked 2 jobs to give you an education to—" "I know, Dad, and I'm grateful, but this is different. I'm trying to close a $200 million deal, 200 million in words. Do you understand the scale of that?" "I get it. I get it that my son is reducing me to the size of a financial obstacle. So what exactly are you asking me for?" "Nothing much. Just be more discreet. Maybe avoid talking about the factory days or how things were different in the past. These investors are young, dynamic. They don't want to hear old-time stories, old man's stories." Every word was a stab. "What if I don't agree?" The silence on the other end lasted an eternity. When Michael finally answered, his voice was as cold as the approaching winter. "Dad, you have nowhere to go. We both know that." He was right. And that hurt more than anything. After I sold my small house to help him start the business, $50,000, which was my entire retirement fund, I really had nowhere to go. "Okay, Michael, I'll be there for Christmas." "Perfect. Oh, and Dad, wear something presentable. I have a spare suit that might fit you." When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking, not from age, from anger. I walked to the small closet in my room and pulled out the bottom drawer. There it was, the yellowed envelope I'd kept for 30 years. The envelope that could destroy everything Michael had built. Maybe it was time for him to discover that not all success comes from one's own merit. What Michael didn't know was that I had far more power over his future than he realized. The Uber stopped in front of the wrought iron gate of Michael's mansion, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. This was the house I dreamed of having when I worked 16-hour days at the steel mill. 3 stories of limestone, gardens that looked like something out of a magazine, and a garage bigger than my entire old house, all paid for with money that, well, money that had a more complicated origin than Michael could ever imagine. "Father!" His voice echoed through the marble hall as the housekeeper ushered me inside. Michael descended the curved staircase like a king descending from his throne, his arms open in a hug that seemed more staged than genuine affection. "You look great," He lied, hugging me briefly. Come on. I want to show you some changes we've made. As we walked through the rooms, I noticed every detail. The crystal chandeliers that cost more than a worker's annual salary. The original paintings on the walls. The grand piano that no one played. How much did it all cost, Michael? Dad, don't worry about such things. He ran a hand through his perfectly combed hair. The important thing is that I'm successful, that I've built something great. Build. That word bothered me. I was the one who had built. I was the one who had sacrificed. And he had no idea. Sarah will be down in a few minutes, he continued, referring to his wife. And the investors arrive at 7. Remember what we talked about? About me behaving, I remember. My voice came out more acidic than I intended. Michael stopped and stared at me. At that moment, I saw something in his eyes that chilled my blood. It was the same cold look I sometimes recognized in the mirror, the same hardness I had developed to survive the most difficult years of my life. Dad, are you okay? You seem tense. I'm doing great, son. Just admiring all this stuff you've built. That night at dinner, I felt like an actor in a play. Sarah, too beautiful and young for Michael, made idle chatter about spas and European trips. The investors, 2 men in their 40s, with suits that cost more than a car, talked about emerging markets and growth opportunities. And me? I was old Samuel, the retired father who had worked in the factory all his life. The simple man who had raised a business genius. If they knew the truth, Mr. Brooks, said one of the investors, James Sullivan, politely including me in the conversation, Michael told us that you worked for many years in a factory. That must have been interesting. Interesting. As if my entire life were just a historical curiosity. Very interesting, I replied, gripping my fork tightly. I learned that things aren't always what they seem. That sometimes the greatest fortunes come from the most unexpected places. Michael gave me a warning look. Father likes to speak in riddles, he laughed nervously. Part of the charm of age, isn't it? But I wasn't done. You know, James, 30 years ago, I discovered something that completely changed my perspective on money and success. Something I've kept with me all these years. The silence at the table was deafening. Michael was pale. How interesting, Mr. Brooks. What is it? I looked straight into my son's eyes. It was now or never. I discovered that those who sow are not always those who reap. Dad! Michael stood up abruptly from the table, knocking over his wineglass, which shattered on the marble floor. How about we show you to your accommodation? I'm sure you're tired from the trip. The investors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah pretended not to notice the tension, smiling mechanically as she called the housekeeper to clean up the broken glass. Accommodation? I asked, feigning innocence. Yes, we've prepared a special space for you, very private. Michael led me down the back hallway, away from the guests, his hand gripping my arm tighter than necessary. When he opened the door, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The garage. He had converted a corner of the garage into a makeshift bedroom. It's temporary, he said quickly, avoiding my gaze. Only as long as the investors are here. You understand, right, Dad? It's a matter of image. Image. I had become a matter of image. In the corner of the garage, between his BMW and Sarah's Mercedes, was a single bed, a small heater, and an old television. As if I were a servant, as if I were nothing. Michael, my voice was hoarse, your childhood bedroom is upstairs, the room where I stayed up all night when you had a fever, where I read you bedtime stories. Dad, please, don't make this harder than it already is. Harder for whom? For you who are ashamed of your own father, or for me who am being treated like an animal? Michael finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke my heart. There was no love. There was no gratitude. There was only calculation. I was an uncomfortable variable in his success equation. Dad, you don't understand the world I live in now. You don't understand the pressure, the expectations. I need $3 million from these investors. $3 million in full. It's my future that's at stake. What about my past? What about everything I sacrificed for you? Doesn't that count? Of course it counts, but that was before. Now I need to think about the future. When the garage door closed, leaving me alone in the cold, I felt something die inside me. It wasn't just my dignity, it was the image I had of my own son. I sat on the narrow bed and pulled the yellowed envelope from my bag. My fingers trembled as I opened it for the first time in years. The photographs were still there, the documents too, and the birth certificate that would prove that, oh my God, I whispered into the silence of the garage. For 30 years, I shielded Michael from the truth. 30 years of lying to protect him. But now, seeing what he had become, I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The sound of laughter came from the house. They were probably toasting the deal, talking about the millions they would make. Michael was inside, basking in the warmth, being admired and respected, and here I was, in the garage, with the truth that could destroy everything. I picked up my old phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 decades. Hello? Detective Morrison? It's Samuel Brooks. I think it's time we talked about the Hamilton case. What Michael didn't know was that some secrets are like ticking time bombs, and mine was about to explode. Samuel? Samuel Brooks? Detective Morrison's voice was deeper, thick with age, but I recognized it immediately. My God, I thought you were dead. Not yet, Tom. Not yet. I walked to the small garage window and peered into the brightly lit house. Shadows of people moved across the dining room like ghosts from my past. Why are you calling now after all these years? I thought we had an agreement. We did, but things have changed. I heard Morrison sigh on the other end of the line. I pictured him at home, probably retired, trying to forget the cases that were never fully resolved. Samuel, the Hamilton case was dismissed 25 years ago. Officially, there was never enough evidence to... I know what happened officially, Tom, but we both know the truth. A long silence, the kind of silence filled with dangerous memories. Do you still have the evidence? Morrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I stared at the open envelope on the bed. The black and white photographs clearly depicted what had happened that night in 1994, the night that changed everything, the night that gave rise to the fortune my son thought he had built on his own. I have everything, Tom. The photos, the documents, the certificate, everything. Why now, Samuel? Why after so long? I looked back at the house. Michael appeared in the living room window, laughing at something one of the investors had said. He was wearing the Rolex watch I'd given him for his 30th birthday, a Rolex bought with money that... Because my son put me to sleep in the garage, Tom. Because he treats me like I'm a nuisance. Because he's forgotten where he came from. And what do you want me to do? The case has been dead for decades. I don't want you to do anything with the case. I want you to meet with me tomorrow. I need to talk to someone who knows the truth. Someone who knows what really happened to Richard Hamilton. Morrison was silent for so long, I thought the line had been disconnected. Samuel, are you sure about this? If this comes out now, it won't just destroy your son. It will destroy you too. Maybe it's time, Tom. Maybe it's time everyone knew the truth about how Michael Brooks really got rich. After I hung up, I stood in the cold garage, looking at the photographs spread out on the bed. One showed Richard Hamilton leaving the bank on the night of December 15th, 1994. Another showed the same Richard Hamilton an hour later, unconscious on the floor of his office. And a third photo showed a younger man, much younger, rifling through Hamilton's open safe. A man who looked exactly like Michael, but that was impossible. Michael was only 8 years old in 1994. He couldn't be in those photos. Unless... I took the last document from the envelope. The birth certificate I had hidden for 30 years. The certificate that proved something that would destroy my son forever. Michael Brooks was not my biological son. And the man in the photographs, the man who had stolen Richard Hamilton's $4.5 million, that man was me. Now the question was, did my adopted son deserve to pay for his father's crime? I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the party that continued into the wee hours. Laughter, business talk, the clinking of expensive champagne glasses. At 3 in the morning, when silence finally fell over the house, I got up and turned on the small lamp beside my bed. I needed to revisit that night, the night that started it all. December 15th, 1994. I was 39 years old and working as a night security guard at the First National Bank of Albany. Margaret had died 4 years earlier, leaving me alone to raise Michael, who was only 8 at the time. 8 years old and already an orphan. Richard Hamilton was the bank manager, an arrogant man who treated employees like me as if we were invisible. But Hamilton had a secret. He was embezzling money from the employees' pension funds, money that was our retirement, money that was our children's future, including Michael's future. That December night, I arrived early for work and caught Hamilton in the safe, transferring the last of his funds to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. $4.5 million, the entire pension fund of 50 families. "Samuel," he said when he saw me, "you shouldn't be here. And you shouldn't be stealing our money." Hamilton laughed. He laughed like it was a big joke. "Robbery! This is business, Samuel. Something you would never understand. Tomorrow morning this bank will go bankrupt. Investigators will discover that the pension fund disappeared months ago. You will be left with nothing. And you'll keep it all. I'll get what I deserve. You're just disposable parts." That's when I lost control. The fight was brief and violent. Hamilton was too drunk and arrogant to defend himself properly. When it was over, he lay unconscious on the ground, bleeding from the head. And I was alone with $4.5 million. For 20 minutes, I stood in that safe, staring at the money, thinking of Michael sleeping at home, unaware that his future had been stolen by a greedy man. Thinking of Margaret's medical bills that still haunted me. Thinking of all the nights I worked 2 jobs to give my son a modicum of dignity. That's when I made the decision that would change our lives forever. I took the money. Hamilton woke up 2 hours later, alone and confused. When the police arrived, they found the safe empty and no evidence of who had taken the money. Hamilton remembered nothing of the fight. The concussion had erased his memories of the last few hours. Detective Morrison was assigned to the case. He suspected me, after all. I was the only employee present that night. But he was never able to prove anything. "Samuel," he told me a week later, "I know it was you. I don't know how. I don't know where the money is, but I know it was you." "I don't know what you're talking about, Detective. The stolen money wasn't just Hamilton's. It was the employees' pension fund, including yours. Why would you steal your own money?" It was a good question. And the answer was simple. Because I knew Hamilton would steal it all anyway. At least that way, some of that money could provide a better future for Michael. Over the next few years, I invested the money carefully. I bought stocks, real estate, and mutual funds. When Michael turned 18, I began helping him financially. I paid for his college tuition, claiming it was my retirement. I financed his first business, claiming I had sold the house. Michael never suspected. To him, I was just a hard-working father who made sacrifices for his son. Now, 30 years later, that 8-year-old orphan boy had become an arrogant billionaire who treated me like dirt. And perhaps it was time for him to discover that his fortune was built on his father's crime. But there was a problem. Michael was not my biological son. And that truth was even more devastating than the robbery. Christmas morning arrived cold and quiet. Through the small garage window, I saw Michael and Sarah exchanging gifts in the luxurious living room, their perfect smiles reflecting off the golden decorations on the Christmas tree, a tree that cost more than my first car. At 10 o'clock in the morning, I heard footsteps approaching the garage. Michael opened the door with a tray in his hand. Cold scrambled eggs and cardboard-like toast. "Good morning, Dad. I brought you breakfast." Father. That word sounded false coming out of his mouth now. "Thank you, Michael. Very generous of you." My irony was not lost on me. "Look, Dad." He sat on the edge of the bed, avoiding my gaze. "I know this isn't ideal, but it's just for today. The investors leave tomorrow morning and then—" "So what? You're going to put me back in the main house, like a dog that goes back inside after visiting?" Michael sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Why are you making this so difficult? I'm trying to build something important here." "Build," I repeated the word slowly. "You really like that word, don't you, Michael? Build, as if everything you have came from nothing, as if you were a self-made man." "And I'm not?" It was the question I had been waiting for 30 years. "Michael, sit down. I need to tell you something." Something in my tone made him pause. For the first time since he'd arrived, he actually looked me in the eye. "What happened, Dad? You've been acting strange since you arrived." I picked up the yellowed envelope and placed it in the space between us. "This envelope contains some truths I've kept hidden for a long time. Truths about me, truths about you, and truths about the money that financed all your success." Michael looked at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. "What are you talking about?" "Michael," my voice trailed off for a moment. "Do you remember your birth mother?" "Of course I remember. Margaret Brooks. She died when I was 4. Cancer." "Margaret died when you were 4. But Margaret wasn't your biological mother." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Michael's world crumbling in his eyes. What are you saying?" I opened the envelope and took out the first birth certificate. "Your real name is Michael Hamilton. You were born on March 15th, 1986. Your biological father's name was Richard Hamilton." Michael took the document with trembling hands. "Hamilton? Like the manager of the bank where you worked?" "The same. But that's impossible. You always said that—" "I lied, Michael. For 30 years I lied to protect you." I took the photographs and handed them to him. "Your biological father was a thief. He stole the pension funds of 50 families, including mine. $4.5 million. When I caught him stealing, we fought. He hit his head and was knocked unconscious." Michael studied the photographs, his face growing paler by the second. And then I discovered something that changed everything. Richard Hamilton had an 8-year-old son, a boy who was sleeping in the back seat of his car, a boy who was going to be raised by a criminal." Tears began to stream down Michael's face. You. Richard had brought you because he had no one else to leave you with. When I saw you there, sleeping innocently while your father committed the crime that would destroy dozens of families, I made a decision." "What decision?" "I took the stolen money. And I took you too." Michael dropped the photographs on the floor. "Did you kidnap me?" "I saved you." Richard Hamilton woke up 2 hours later, confused by the concussion. The police arrived and found the safe empty. He reported the robbery but never mentioned that he had lost his son as well. He was probably afraid to admit that he had taken a child to witness a crime. "And Margaret?" "Margaret couldn't have children. When I showed up at your house, I told her I'd found you abandoned. She officially adopted you 6 months later. You became Michael Brooks." Michael was silent for long minutes, processing the information. "All my money, all my success, it was built with money your biological father stole. Money I stole from him to give you a better life. So you are a thief. And I am the son of a thief. Try." Michael stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth across the garage. "My whole life is a lie. Your whole life has been a protection, Michael. I protected you from the truth because I loved you like a son, because I wanted you to have a chance to be better than both of us. And now, why are you telling me this now?" I looked straight into his eyes. "Because you put me to sleep in the garage like an old dog. Because you forgot that everything you have came from my sacrifice. And because maybe it's time for you to decide what kind of man you want to be." Michael stopped walking and stared at me. What do you want from me? It was the most important question in our history, and my answer would change everything. What do I want from you? I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my 69 years. I want you to remember who you were before you became this cold, calculating person. Michael turned his back to me, looking out the small garage window at the mansion that had become his gilded prison. You don't understand, Dad. Samuel, I don't even know what to call you anymore. Call me what you want. But answer me one thing. Was it worth it? What? Trading your humanity for this life, trading the love of the only person who raised you for these millions. Was it worth humiliating myself to impress strangers? Michael turned around, and for the first time in years, I saw tears in his eyes. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Fear of not being good enough. Fear that they would find out I wasn't cut out for this. That I didn't deserve to be in this position, and now you've discovered you were right. You don't deserve to be in this position. My words hit him like a slap. The money that financed your education, your first businesses, your rise to the top, all of it came from crime. You became a billionaire with stolen money. But I didn't know. It doesn't matter if you knew. It matters what you do now that you know. Michael sat down heavily on the bed next to me. What do you want me to do? Confess everything? Destroy my life, my company, my family? I want you to choose. I took out my phone and showed it to him. I called Detective Morrison last night. He's still alive, retired, but willing to reopen the case. With the evidence I have, I can bring both you and me to justice. Michael looked at me in horror. Would you do that? Would you destroy your own life to destroy me? Not to destroy you, Michael. To save you. Like this? I got up and started walking around the garage, gathering my thoughts. For 30 years I've carried the weight of two crimes. The theft of the money and its kidnapping. 30 years of lying, hiding, living in fear. I'm tired, son. And if you tell everything, what happens to me? Legally? You were a child when it all happened. You probably wouldn't be prosecuted. But financially, I paused. Everything you've built would be questioned. Your investors would flee. Your company would collapse. You would lose everything. Michael was silent for long minutes, absorbing the magnitude of the situation. But there is an alternative, I continued, which you can choose to do the right thing on your own. I took another document from the envelope, one I had prepared years ago but never had the courage to use. This is a survey of all the families that were harmed by the 1994 robbery. 50 families lost their pensions. Most are still alive. Some are experiencing financial difficulties. Michael took the list with trembling hands. What are you suggesting? May you return what is not yours. May you use your fortune to restore what was stolen from these people. May you transform a crime into justice. That would cost $20 million. 20 million in words. With interest and adjustment, that's what those 4.5 million are worth today. Michael looked at the list, reading the names. Robert Chen, Maria Santos, Thomas Wright. His voice trailed off. I know that name. Thomas Wright. He works in my building. He's the doorman. Thomas Wright lost his entire pension in that robbery. At 72, he still has to work to survive. While you, with money that should have been his, live in this mansion. Tears returned to Michael's eyes. How do I live with this? You don't live, you exist. And you exist in a way that shames the 8-year-old boy I saved that night. Michael got up and walked to the window again. What if I do this? What if I give the money back? What happens to us? That's up to you, Michael. You can continue to treat me like a nuisance, like someone who tarnishes your image, or you can remember that I gave up everything to give you a better life. I remember. Her voice was low, embarrassed. I remember you reading me bedtime stories. I remember you working 2 jobs. I remember you crying when you thought I wasn't looking after Margaret died. So you still remember the man you were before you became a billionaire. Michael turned to me, and for the first time in years, I saw my son again. Not the cold, calculating businessman, but the boy I had raised with love. Dad, Samuel, my real name doesn't matter. You're my father, the only father I've ever had. And you are my son, regardless of the blood that runs through our veins. What do I need to do? I smiled for the first time in days. First, you get me out of this garage and into your home, to the family table, where I belong. Done. Second, you call your lawyer tomorrow morning and set up a fund to compensate the families on the list. And third, you decide whether you want to be Michael Brooks, the man who was raised with love and values, or Michael Hamilton, the son of a criminal who perpetuates his father's crimes. Michael reached out his hand to me. My name is Michael Brooks, and I want to go home. When I shook his hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. But our story was not over yet. On the other side of the garage window, I saw a familiar figure walking towards the front door of the house. Detective Morrison had arrived, and he wasn't alone. "Dad, there's someone at the door," Michael said, his voice suddenly tense. Through the window we saw Detective Morrison, older, white-haired, but still imposing in his dark winter coat. Beside him, a younger man I didn't recognize. "Did you call him?" Michael asked me. "Last night, but I didn't expect him to come today." "No, Natal. Some cases never leave a police officer alone, Michael. Morrison carried the mystery of the Hamilton robbery for 30 years. We heard the doorbell ring, followed by Sarah's confused voice answering the door. Moments later, footsteps headed our way. Michael looked at me in panic. "What do we do?" "We face the consequences together." The garage door opened, and Morrison appeared, followed by the younger man. His eyes scanned the scene, me sitting on the makeshift bed, Michael beside me, the documents spread out between us. "Samuel Brooks," Morrison said, his voice thick with emotion. 30 years searching for you." "Not very well, apparently. I always knew where I was." "Yes, I knew, but I never had proof." He looked at the documents. "Until now." The younger man introduced himself. "I'm Federal Agent Matthews. Financial crimes. Detective Morrison contacted me yesterday, saying he had information about the Hamilton case." Michael stood up, instinctively placing himself between me and the two men. "He's my father. Anything you want to talk to him about, you can talk to me about too." Morrison smiled sadly. "Michael Hamilton, or should I say Michael Brooks, you grew up to be a successful man. How do you know who I am?" "Because I was there that night, kid. I saw your father, your adoptive father, pull you out of Richard Hamilton's car." My world stopped. You saw?" Morrison nodded. "I saw it all, Samuel. I saw you fight Hamilton. I saw you take the money, and I saw you save a child from a criminal." "And did nothing?" "What could I do? Arrest you for stealing from a thief, for saving an 8-year-old boy from being raised by a man who had robbed 50 families. Agent Matthews looked confused. "Detective Morrison, I don't understand. If you knew all this—" "I knew, but I couldn't prove it. And honestly, part of me didn't want to prove it." Morrison walked over to where we were sitting. "Samuel, you committed a crime, but you also prevented a greater crime. Richard Hamilton was not a victim. He was the original criminal." "Then why are you here?" asked Michael. "Because," Matthews said, "yesterday we received an anonymous tip about Michael Brooks. Someone claimed his fortune was built with stolen money." I felt my blood run cold. "A complaint from whom?" "We don't know, but the person knew details that only someone very close could know." Michael and I looked at each other. Who could have done this? "However," Matthews continued, "after speaking with Detective Morrison, we understand that the situation is far more complex." Morrison sat down in a nearby chair. "Samuel, why did you decide to tell everything now, after 30 years? I looked at Michael, who was pale but standing firm beside me. "Because my son put me to sleep in a garage, because he forgot the values I tried to teach, and because I realized that protecting him from the truth didn't make him a better person, it made him a worse person. And now, Michael stepped forward. Now I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to establish a fund to compensate the families harmed by the original theft. $20 million. Matthews raised his eyebrows. 20 million. That's what $4.5 million is worth today, with interest. Each family will receive back what they lost, with full correction. Morrison smiled. What about the crimes of 30 years ago? I took a deep breath. I'm ready for the consequences. I always have been. What crimes? Morrison said, standing up. Officially, the Hamilton case was dismissed for lack of evidence. Richard Hamilton reported a robbery, but was never able to prove who was responsible. And an abandoned child was legally adopted by a loving family. Matthews looked even more confused. Detective Morrison, Agent Matthews, some cases are best left alone, especially when real justice has already been served. I looked at Morrison gratefully. Thank you, Tom. Don't thank me yet, Samuel. There's one condition. Which? May you two learn to be a real family. May Michael treat you with the respect you deserve. And may you stop carrying the weight of the world alone. Michael held out his hand to help me up. Dad, let's go inside. It's Christmas and you should be at the family table. When we pulled out of the driveway, I saw Sarah waiting at the back door, tears in her eyes. Michael, is everything okay? It's okay, love. Father will have dinner with us tonight, at the head table, just like it should have been. That night, I sat at the head of the Brooks family Christmas table. The investors had left, confused by the sudden change of plans, but I didn't care. Michael made a toast. To the man who taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about love. To my father, Samuel Brooks. When I raised my glass of wine, I felt like I had finally arrived home. 2 months later, I read in the newspaper that Michael Brooks had established the largest private compensation fund in Albany's history. 50 families received their pensions back, with interest. And Thomas Wright, the 72-year-old doorman, was finally able to retire. This story makes us reflect on the true values that build a family and a purposeful life. How often do we confuse financial success with personal success? How often do we forget those who sacrificed everything for our future? Samuel Brooks teaches us that sometimes love demands impossible decisions, and that protecting someone doesn't always mean sparing them the truth. Michael discovered that his identity lay not in the money he possessed, but in the values he chose to embrace. The story also asks us, when is forgiveness possible? When can a family rebuild after betrayal and lies? Perhaps the answer lies in the willingness of both parties to choose love over pride, truth over convenience. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. And tell me in the comments, could you forgive Michael? Or did Samuel go too far in hiding the truth for so long?